Good evening and welcome to Solidarity on Tap. My name is Chris Kerr with the Ignatian Solidarity Network, and on behalf of everyone at ISN, as well as our national Solidarity on Tap sponsors, Mary Noel Lay Missioners, Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and Jesuit Volunteer Corps Northwest, thanks to everyone for joining in tonight. For over 15 years, the Ignatian Solidarity Network has been uniting the Ignatian family, meaning the Jesuit network, as well as all those who are inspired to work for justice through the spiritual tradition of St. Ignatius of Loyola, to build a more just world through faith-based social justice formation, education, and advocacy. If you haven't already, please check out our website, ignatiansolidarity.net, and like and follow us on social media to get the latest advocacy alerts, educational resources, and much more. As you may know, Solidarity on Tap usually takes place in cities across the country, bringing together members of the Ignatian family. And even though we're gathering virtually tonight, and we have been for many months now, the goal of Solidarity on Tap is the same: to invite people to enjoy fellowship, maybe with a drink in hand, and to hear powerful reflections from members of the network engaged in work for justice. And as usual, in order to build and enjoy fellowship tonight, I want to encourage everyone out there to utilize the comment section on Facebook or YouTube, or post to Twitter or Instagram with the hashtag ISNLive to let us know you and your institution are represented here tonight. That means if you graduated from somewhere, if you're going to school somewhere, if you're a parishioner, a current or former volunteer, let us know, okay? And make sure also to post your comments and questions for our guest speaker this evening on either Twitter or Facebook as well. And we'll make sure to try to weave those into the conversation, okay? Now, as we join together as an Ignatian family this evening, we're holding many people in our prayers, including all those who are victims of violence. And that includes those who've been executed recently by federal or state governments. These include people like Daniel Lewis Lee, Wesley Ira Perkey, Dustin Lee Honkin, and Billy Joe Wardlow. We also hold in our prayers all those who've been victims of race-based violence, especially those whose lives have been taken and those who are using their bodies, their words, and their actions to stand for racial justice. And we continue to pray for all people who are affected by COVID-19. We hope that tonight's conversation provides the opportunity to explore the important work that is being done to end capital punishment and build more just systems, and that our conversation can lead us toward a hope-filled future. So with this in mind, I'm really excited to introduce our speaker this evening, Krisanne Vaillancourt Murphy. Krisanne is the Executive Director of Catholic Mobilizing Network. She has 25 years of experience working in national level faith-based policy advocacy. She's been quoted in sources such as the New York Times, CNN, America Magazine, Crux, National Reporter, EWTN News Nightly, and featured on Just Love Radio on Sirius XM. For more than a decade, Krisanne served as the senior church relations staff at Bread for the World, a collective Christian voice urging our nation's decision makers to end hunger at home and abroad. Krisanne is co-author of Advocating for Justice, an evangelical vision for transforming systems and structures. From 2003 to 2005, Krisanne served as the executive director of Witness for Peace, a politically independent, faith-based national grassroots organization committed to promoting peace, justice, and nonviolence in U.S. foreign policy. Krisanne served as an associate with the Latin American Working Group, one of the nation's largest standing religious coalitions dedicated to a just foreign policy in the region. She had a special focus on labor rights and corporate responsibility. Krisanne also served for a year in a faith-based domestic service program working alongside migrant workers in Woodburn, Oregon. Krisanne holds a master's in theology degree from Boston College School of Theology and Ministry, formerly known as Weston Jesuit School of Theology in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And she and her husband, Jay, reside in Washington, D.C. with their 3 children. Welcome, Krisanne. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Good to be with you, Chris.
So, Krisanne, you run a national faith-based social justice organization, just like I do, and we've been doing this work for the past over 4 months now in the midst of a pandemic. What's that been like for you and your staff? How are you managing all this that's going on?
Well, thanks for the question. There's a great staff at Catholic Mobilizing Network, and I'm happy to say we are all well. Our families are all well. Not to diminish the fact that we all have lost people we know in this time of COVID. So there has been a lot of sadness, but there's also, been some new ways of learning and collaborating, being a team and doing the work of ending the death penalty, promoting restorative justice, and working with partners like ISN. So we're doing well. We're working mostly from home and using every technology we know of to connect with each other and collaborators around the country. So we're doing okay.
Good. That's great. And I feel like it's the first few weeks of we're an adjustment, and now I feel like everybody's starting to kind of find their way and rethink a little bit about how they do this and come up with new ways and creative ways and find exciting ways to engage people. So it's good to hear the same happening for you all at CMN. Krisanne, I read your bio, which is an amazing, litany of work for justice over many years. But can you tell us a little bit about kind of how it all came together? How did you get kind of to where you are? What was it that caused you to be on that path to work with LOG and with Witness for Peace and all those great organizations, and now at CMN today? How did it all start?
Yeah. Well, a couple things come to mind quickly, and I'll try not to make it too long of a story, but there's just a couple things that are kind of symbolic. One is, I think one of your sponsors for ISN is Mary Knoll. And when I was a kid, I was a cradle Catholic. My family had the Mary Knoll magazine that came to our house every month, and I would pour through it and look at the pictures. Are so incredibly different than what I was experiencing in my suburban town in Connecticut. But to see pictures of people from all over the globe and different cultures, and I was so intrigued by the world, the big world outside of where I was from in the U.S. And I, in college, I became an anthropology major. I think, that was a kind of a deep-seated in my heart, that just a care or concern or a, curiosity about cultures. So I became an anthropology major, and I just visited University of Connecticut, which is my alma mater, this past weekend because we were traveling through New England, and my husband and I thought, well, let's show our kids where we went to school. He went to Holy Cross and I went to UConn. So they're not far from each other. So we stopped at UConn. And I was recalling that when I was there, I saw a film and heard a speaker talk about his walk across America. And I remember thinking the stories I heard from this man who had been in the deep South. He had been he had been living with sharecroppers. I didn't even really know they still existed. He had lived in the inner city. He had walked through mountainous terrain and seen farms and, seen farmers and migrant farm workers, and just how vast this country was. And I started listening to his story of the U.S., this kind of off the beaten path. And I remember thinking, there's something that's similar to the Mary Knoll magazine about that. There's a culture here that I don't really know of, or there's many cultures. And so when it came time to graduate from UConn, I decided to do a year of service. And I joined the Brethren Volunteer Service, which was, a faith-based Brethren, Anabaptist, kind of a peace-affiliated faith service year. And the project that I chose was to work with migrant farm workers. I had been learning some Spanish and thought, okay, maybe I could do this, So I moved out to Oregon, and really my world turned upside down. There were there was so much to what was happening with migrant farm workers, why they were leaving Mexico and other places, largely in Central America, at least where I was, and coming to pick strawberries, coming to work in the fields and in the farms and in the tree nurseries. And so I learned a whole lot about this country and that there was a lot I didn't know. And, kind of ruined for life, as they say in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, I believe. I really was. There was no going back. There was no kind of turning away from. Once you see the injustices in the country or anywhere, once you see injustice, I don't think you can unsee them. And I definitely, I was ruined to work for social justice from that point forward. So I worked for a year with Pineros y Campesinos Unidos del Noreste, which is the farm worker union in Woodburn, Oregon, or most of Oregon. I met my husband there. We didn't marry till many years later, but he was in JVC while we were together in that same town. So that's how I originally got to meet him. And after that year of service, I really wanted to look at U.S. policy towards Latin America and why people were leaving. And what was happening with this poverty pressure cooker and human rights abuses. And so that's where I hooked up with the Latin America Working Group. I did a second year of service with LOG and just, became much more informed about what was happening in Mexico and certainly in Central America. The civil unrest there and the wars and what happened, how the U.S. was involved, and certainly about the Jesuit martyrs. That this was in the 90s, so it had been not that many years since the slaying of the 6 at the Yucca, but other countries too, Guatemala, Nicaragua. So I did that for 3 years and felt like I know I'm going to be in this work for a while, in this justice work. This was more human rights focused than labor rights focused, although there was some of that there too. So I knew I would be doing this work from a place of, faith and sort of a theological grounding. And so I thought, well, no matter what I do, I know that I want to shore up the theological piece and sort of the faith orientation to my work. And so that's where a good Jesuit friend of mine told me about Weston Jesuit, now Boston College, the divinity school. And so I moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and got my master's in theology, and worked with some incredible theologians there, but knew that I wanted to come back to DC too, to continue this kind of work. And so I got a phone call in my second year from somebody at Bread for the World, and God love him, Tom Murphy. He just recently passed. He was my original boss at Bread, and I turned out to work there for 12 years. But he called and he said, "Hi, my name is Tom Murphy, and I got your name through a friend, and I understand that you've worked in Washington. You want to come back, and I think I have a job that you might be interested in." I said, "What is Bread for the World again?" He said, "Well, we work on hunger." And I thought, I don't work on hunger. I work on human rights abuses, or I work on labor rights, but I don't work on hunger. And he said, "Well, you just come down here and and have a conversation." And so I went, and I really enjoyed immensely the staff and the mission, and thought, wow, maybe I could really enjoy this work and thrive in this environment. And so I ended up staying, like I said, at Bread for the World. Chris, and that's where I originally met you, was through the work at Bread for the World. And there was, what were you going to say?
No, I was thinking, but keep going. But I want to come back to something. I realized we have another connection. I didn't realize. So.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so I had 2 stints at Bread for the World. I had a first 3 years, and then I left to run Witness for Peace, which is pulling me back into Latin America, looking at U.S. policy in the region, and then taking U.S. delegations down, students and people of faith who wanted to have homestays and really have pretty intensive tours, not in a touristy kind of way, but in a kind of a fact-finding, very intensive form. So I did that for 3 years, and then started having kids and thought I probably shouldn't be traveling that much and doing all that. So I was staying home a little bit in Bread for the World. So why don't you come back here and, just work whatever you want to work. So I eventually started working very much full time there. Kind of before I knew it, I was back in the swing. I was working with evangelicals at that point. Never knew any evangelicals. I didn't understand anything about evangelicals. I was Catholic. Why would they want me to work with evangelicals? But then I enjoyed that immensely, and I learned a ton. And I did that for like 8 years. That was my second stint at Bread. So this is where it comes to CMN. So it was 12 years later. I'd been doing all that work and loved Bread for the World. I have such a deep respect for David Beckman and now the new leader there, Eugene Cho, who was an evangelical that I met along the way. But I really just felt like I had done, kind of what I was to do at Bread for the World. And it was a very certain kind of feeling, like I was, I think I've done it here.
Yeah.
And I remember calling David Beckman and saying, David, I think I'm done. He said, what, are you kidding? Like, what do you mean you're done? Where are you going? And I said, well, I don't have another job yet, but I just think I'm done. So, because God was really at work. Sure. And God had a plan. And I think I needed to take that leap just to kind of give God the credit, and give God that trusting kind of step. And very shortly after I left Bread for the World, that's when I got a call from the founder of Catholic Mobilizing Network, somebody who I had met many years before. And she said, I think we should have a conversation because I've been watching your career and I am thinking about what's next for this organization. And I'd really like you to consider, kind of coming on with us. And she had me over for breakfast with Sister Helen Prejean. And I would say between Karen Clifton and Sister Helen Prejean, I was never going to get out of there without getting a job. They're formidable. They certainly are convincing women. So I ended up working here at CMN. But here's the other thing. As I was kind of in my last couple of years at Bread for the World, we started looking a lot at mass incarceration. And if we were to really consider what it would take to end hunger, we couldn't really do that without looking at why communities were so, impacted by this, division, this over incarceration that just affects so many lives. It affects the economy. It affects everything that's happening in our communities across the country. And that's when I started really learning a lot more about incarceration and then getting pulled in to understand that the death penalty is really the tip of the iceberg on the broken criminal justice system. So sure. I'm exactly where I should be.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great story. And so many kind of common experiences. But I was going to tell you, I was leading youth delegations with Witness for Peace. I think I led 3 years in a row to Nicaragua, 2003, 4, 5, I think, or maybe 2000, maybe it was 2, 3, 4, I forget, but right around that time that you would have been, that brief time you would have been there. And so those experiences were so formational for those students, but for me as well, and especially the experiences of living with families, both in Managua and in the Campo, during an interesting time in Nicaragua's history in terms of continued U.S. presence and intervention and things like that. So,
yes,
great.
Thank you for taking those delegations, Chris.
Yeah,
That's
awesome. It wasn't easy. Yeah, trust me. But good work, important work. So that's a great story. And so many different connections. Speaking of connections, we have folks who are sharing their connections from kind of the Catholic networks out there, schools and parishes and stuff like that. So I just want to recognize some folks that have chimed in and say hello to them. So Mary Kay is joining us from Columbia, Maryland. Welcome, Mary Kay. Kate Carter, she's out in Oakland, California. She's a former JV a parishioner at St. Agnes there in San Francisco, former JST student, former USF staff. Oh, and it goes on. Also, former coordinator of Witness for Peace, Michigan. So welcome to Kate. Great to have her with us. Karen says hello. Says hello, Krisanne and Chris from Marion Lay Missioners here in Elk Ridge, Maryland. Thanks for another great evening of learning. Joanne says hello from Seattle University. Tom says hi, Gonzaga alum and lives in Reno now. Welcome, Tom. And then Gretchen is in Aurora, Colorado, teaches at Regis Jesuit out there. And then welcome to Colleen, who's a St. Louis University alum. So great to have all those folks. Oh, and also to welcome to Maggie Conley, who is a Xavier alum, former JVC staff, and works with the Sisters of Mercy and is a good colleague, professional colleague of both Krisanne and I. And it's great to have Maggie with us tonight as well. Welcome, Maggie. So Krisanne, let's talk a little bit about the work you're doing now with Catholic Mobilizing and some of all that's happening. But before we jump into kind of the current day, I wanted to just jump back a couple of years. Back in 2018, August of 2018, Pope Francis approves a change to the catechism to making the death penalty inadmissible under any circumstances in the context of Catholic teaching. The language, it said in the catechism, it now says the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. And it goes on to say the church works with determination for its abolition worldwide. This seems like a big deal that this happened, that we kind of intentionally include that language into the catechism. How has that impacted the work of the Catholic Mobilizing Network over the past couple of years?
Yeah, no, it's huge. I'm so glad you brought that up. Well, if I could go back just a couple paces before that. So when Pope Francis came to Washington, he came to the US, right, in September of 2015, many of us remember, I'm sure, lots of folks here on the tonight remember when he was speaking before the US Congress, and he talked about ending the death penalty. And I remember exactly where I was. I was in New York Grand Central Station, and I had just gotten off of the train, or Penn Station, I guess. And I had gotten off of the train, and I stopped by this deli because I could see him, and I didn't want to miss anything. Here he was like speaking before Congress in my hometown. I live on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., but I was going to New York because that's where he was going after, and Brett was doing some events and whatnot. And he took the time to talk about ending the death penalty. And I remember my heart leapt, because I had, like many of us, I had seen the movie, read the book, Dead Man Walking in the 90s, and was convicted, about the death penalty and capital punishment. And to think that we knew that the church was mostly by and large against the death penalty. And the U.S. church has been, seeking abolition for at least a couple decades now. But the catechism had a loophole in it, and said that, in cases where, you cannot keep society safe, you could potentially use capital punishment. And before that, that was like, there had been progress along the way with Evangelium Vitae, and, there had been kind of this closing of the loophole, but there was still a loophole. And anyone who was pro-capital punishment would always tell you that the church, was really not, it was not an always kind of thing. There was, if a case was bad enough and everybody became judge and jury, then that whatever case was in question was the case. And that, but this is terrible what's happened. And so, so fast forward to August of 2018, the Pope had been saying things, and certainly his year of mercy and all these moves that we saw, his great kind of sympathetic kind of positioning around people who were incarcerated, and all that he had done for people who were immigrating across the globe. But here it is in August of 2018, there's actually a change to the catechism. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Pope Francis, there was documents, there was new language, catechism. See, the 2267 is the actual, part of the catechism that was changed. And then there was several pages of a document that came out for priests and for bishops around the globe to understand why there had been this evolution. And, you know, it was a newer understanding of dignity. It was a newer understanding about rehabilitation, and a newer understanding that we could keep people safe. And that even when there's a commission of a very serious crime, even grave crime, people do not lose their dignity. So we cannot take their life. And, you know, at that point, I was working at CMN for, I guess, about a year, maybe a year and a half. And no one saw it coming. I mean, there had been movement, but to actually change the catechism, I mean, that was tectonic. And I remember reading about it, and my phone started blowing up. Like it just all was happening at the same time. I was in my pajamas. I had my coffee. I was, you know, because this was like Italian time, and here they were starting their day, and I'm just hearing about it, reading about it, and it was quite stunning. And then, you know, there was all this press. I was so unprepared, but it was pretty exciting. And the other part of it is, in some ways, when the church had not said anything really new about the death penalty for a number of years, the detractors, people who are pro-death penalty, and that's even from the pews, you know, even from our Catholic brothers and sisters, you know, there's still a lot of division around the death penalty. So the fact that this was coming up and now there was this change, a lot of folks began to think, well, is this a Pope Francis thing? And he said other things that we don't agree with. So, you know, this is all manufactured by Pope Francis, and this isn't really the church. And it really is. It really was the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And yes, Pope Francis is Pope. It happened on his watch, but it's official. And so that's pretty darn exciting. I would say that, you know, we did see a new level of opposition, you know, at the same time, because this critique about Francis, critique about, well, you can't really change church teaching, but we know that that teaching evolves, and we know that God's mercy abounds. And this seems to be quite consistent with what we know about God's love, that no one is excluded from God's love, and that at no point do we have the, you know, should we have the power to snuff out a life that God gives. So it has emboldened our work, and I think hopefully amplifies the message to such a degree that we can abolish the death penalty in this country for good.
That's I remember the address to Congress as well, and just the way people reacted to elements of that speech. I remember being out in front of the Capitol on the lawn and watching. There were a ton of congressional aides, young staffers from congressional offices that didn't get into the Capitol to listen, but and to watch people react to different parts of it. And that was an interesting one. The death penalty one was an interesting one because it actually got a more robust reaction of applause and cheering than many of the other things that the Pope said. And it kind of gave me a little bit of hope. But in the past couple of weeks, I've been losing a little bit of this hope. Of course, just recently we had the first federal execution in 17 years. Daniel Lewis Lee was killed, and then we've had other people who have been killed on behalf of or by our government, executed by our government. Can you give us a little bit of context about what federal executions mean? How did we get to this point that we're doing this when in some ways it seemed like our country was actually moving the other direction, that states were starting to put moratoriums on execution, on capital punishment, and things like that. So what does this all mean?
That's a good question. And I think pointing out just how wrong-headed this is, and how really how much out of step it is with the trending of the American public's growing opposition to the death penalty. You're right. We just had some really incredible wins when it comes to state abolitions, the state of Washington, the state of Colorado. Oh my gosh, you can see my bunny in the back. Buddy, get off the sofa. He's not supposed to be on the sofa. But we've had other states, as well. California's moratorium that came out last year. And California has the largest death row, maybe in the Western Hemisphere. So we have 22 states that don't have the death penalty. We have 3 that are under current moratoriums, like Pennsylvania, Oregon, California. And then of the remaining states, like half of those haven't even executed anybody in 10 years. So you've got this like de facto moratorium. So there's so many reasons that the death penalty is just no longer appealing for across society. And I think that will continue. Having said that, and the federal death penalty was kind of along those lines as well. For the last 17 years, there has been no executions. The federal death row has like 60, I think it's like 65 individuals on it. And for a really long time, there were no executions. And there's been, threats along the way, but it seemed like for the longest time, no one really wanted to execute anyone there. And so when you have all these states, that they either have the death penalty or they don't, and then you have the federal government that potentially has the use of the death penalty, and they weren't using it either. When we ever learned last year in July, so this time last year, that President Trump and Attorney General Barr were trying to reinstate the federal executions, and how they were, it never was off the books, but it was not in use. They were trying to resume the use. And to do that, what they did is they put forward 5 names of individuals on death row that had exhausted their appeals. And they were not very sympathetic figures. I mean, they had committed some terrible crimes, and they wanted those individuals executed. And so that all of a sudden, that kind of woke up an entire, appeals and back and forth injunction and circuit court and DC court and Supreme Court and, just come legal wranglings. So we've been watching quite closely, and Catholic Mobilizing Network, around December, we actually did a federal petition and got thousands upon thousands of signers that said, please do not restart these federal executions. And we sent that to Attorney General Barr, who is Catholic, and there was many people spoke out. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and state Catholic conferences, and again, people in the pews. There was lots of media around it, like, don't go in this direction. And as we were approaching July, there was back and forth legal considerations, and decisions were made, and it gotten closer to actually moving forward, and new dates were set for these individuals, and they were for this July. So what can I tell you about the executions? They were avoidable. They were unnecessary. These individuals weren't hurting anyone. In terms of Daniel Lewis Lee, the victims, the murder victim family members, several of them in that case, the mother of the daughter and the granddaughter that were killed, came forward, Earlene Peterson, and she said, please don't kill in my name. I don't want him to die. She actually worked towards saving his life, very publicly, including there were actual appeals that had her involved in it, saying, don't do this in a time of COVID, et cetera. We can't get to the execution chamber. It's unsafe. I mean, there was many, many things that they were doing, in addition to her just saying, and don't use me as an excuse for killing, because I don't want this. It won't bring my daughter and my granddaughter back. in his case, his execution date was set for last Monday. And it was going back and forth in the courts all the way into the wee hours of the night. It was scheduled for 4 p.m. on Monday. And there had been an injunction. The Supreme Court came in, went back and forth. All this to say, we all went to bed and he was still alive and it was still kind of in the courts. His execution date by midnight, his execution date had expired. And the federal government is not supposed to take someone's life without that date being set and all the legal machinations being in order. That didn't happen by midnight. By 4 a.m., there had been more back and forth legally. His attorneys were not present. They learned that he had been strapped to the gurney for 4 hours. That's literally strapped with the injection, needle in him, the catheter, waiting to see if he would die or not, and waiting for the decision. His legal team was not present and his life was taken at 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning. So we learned about that on Tuesday morning. I mean, when it happened, and it was like it caught the death penalty community by surprise, because no one thought that without an appropriate execution date that it could go forward. But they took the liberties to execute him, and then Wesley Perkey. So that was Tuesday. His date was set for Wednesday. He had dementia and schizophrenia. He no longer understood why someone would be taking his life. He didn't understand the crime he had committed. That was on Wednesday. And on Friday, then that one went through. And then on Friday, Dustin Honkin, who was Catholic, his life was taken. We had been in conversation with his federal defenders because he was in search of a spiritual director. He actually knows Cardinal Tobin. Cardinal Tobin had visited him on numerous occasions when he was in Indiana. So when he was bishop there, he would visit Terre Haute, the federal penitentiary, on occasion. Dustin Hawkins' last words were reading a poem from a Jesuit. I don't know if you had heard that.
Yeah.
It just really hits hard. I mean, in the span of like 57 years, the federal government had executed 3 people. So it took 57 years before now to execute 3 people. And in the span of 4 days, another 3 people were executed in 2020. So it's sobering, it's stunning, it's disgusting, it's enraging, it's terribly sad. So here we are. But I want to read you something, because I don't know that, maybe Chris, you saw it, but Sean Nolan was Dustin Honkin's federal attorney, and this is what he says about him. It's not very long, but if you'll just
sure.
allow me. He said, Dustin Honkin was redeemed. He recognized and repented for the crimes he had committed and spent time in prison atoning for them. With Father Mark, Sister Betty, Cardinal Tobin, and other religious mentors, Dustin worked every day at the Catholic faith that was the center of his life. During his time in prison, he cared for everyone he came into contact with: guards, counselors, medical staff, his fellow inmates, and his legal team. Over the years, he grew incredibly close to his family, becoming a true son, brother, and friend. There was no reason for the government to kill him in haste or at all. At that, they failed. The Dustin Honkin they wanted to kill is long gone. The man they killed today was a human being who could have spent the rest of his days helping others and further redeeming himself. May he rest in peace.
Thanks for sharing that, Krisanne. And the poem you referenced was by Jesuit Gerard Manley Hopkins, an English poet. and the poem was named Heaven-Haven. It's a sad way to take a break, but I want to take a quick break so that we can share some announcements and information about our sponsors. We also have a few folks we want to let us know they're here, so we want to recognize those folks. So we'll come back to you in a minute, Krisanne, but thanks for kind of closing out this part of our time together with that reflection. So let's say hello to some other folks that are with us tonight. We want to say hi to Meredith, who's a Fordham alum living in New York City and is a parishioner at St. Ignatius Loyola in Manhattan. Welcome to Meredith. We want to say hello to Joanne, who's an FJV, was in Houston, a grad of BCSDM and of St. Joseph's University. Welcome to Liz, who's a former Jesuit volunteer in Santa Monica, California, now lives in Rhode Island. Meredith is a Fordham alum living in New York City. We heard from Meredith, I think, already. Good. Father David Malcolm, who's up at Lemoyne College, and I think knows Krisanne, says so proud of her work. Mary Helen says greetings from Managua, so welcome from Nicaragua, Mary. Kim says hi from Regis University, welcome, Kim. Anne Marie says greetings from Glen Rock, New Jersey. Anne Marie's with Christian Life Community, so welcome to Anne Marie. So thank you for being with us. Hello to Vanessa from Hudson, and Vanessa's a former intern with the Ignatian Solidarity Network. So great to see you, Vanessa, and hope you're doing well. Thanks to everyone who's with us tonight. Feel free to share a shout out or also to pose a question for Krisanne. We'll have a little bit of time for questions here in a few minutes, so don't hesitate to post a question or a comment. We're going to take a quick transition here and talk about some of our sponsors. But before we do that, I wanted to share some ways that you can be connected with the work of the Ignatian Solidarity Network. Earlier this month, we launched a new Novena for racial justice, inviting you to unite with the Ignatian family in prayer and action. In the Catholic tradition, a novena is an ancient form of devotional prayer over a period of 9 days for a specific intention. And you can participate in that novena. There's a URL there on the screen, igsol.net/novena. So make sure to join us and pray with us. Secondly, you can be part of the first ever virtual Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice, just like many other things in the world. The teach-in will be going virtual this November. You can join the largest annual Catholic Social Justice Conference in the country from a screen near you. The teach-in will take place from October 19th to 26th of this year. And additional information and the link to register can be found at igsol.net/IFTJ. You can join ISN and members of the Ignatian family for the 21-day Ignatian Racial Equity Challenge. This 21-day email campaign will provide daily resources to learn, pray, and act on a variety of issues related to racial justice and racial equity. You can sign up right now and begin the challenge. If you sign up now, we'll start you on day one tomorrow. You can go to igsol.net/21challenge to sign up. And now let me tell you a little bit about our sponsors. We have three great sponsors tonight. Mary Nolay Missioners, who Krisanne mentioned earlier. They work internationally with those at the margins for a more just, compassionate, and sustainable world. To learn more about their work, join their Meet a Missioner Monday live streams on their Facebook page every Monday at 11 a.m. So make sure to check out a Meet a Missioner Monday. The Jesuit Volunteer Corps is a full-time volunteer program that works for social justice while exploring spirituality and faith through a framework of Catholic Ignatian values for individuals 21 to 35 years of age. You can learn more at jesuitvolunteers.org. And JVC Northwest, Jesuit Volunteer Corps Northwest, they're focused on the core values of community, simple living, social and ecological justice, and spirituality and reflection. JVC Northwest is a national direct AmeriCorps program serving in 24 locales across Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. You have to be 21 or over to be eligible for JVC Northwest, all right? Now, if you liked our conversation tonight and you want to share it or watch it again, don't worry. Tonight's conversation and all of our previous Solidarity on Tap and any live broadcast is available both at ignatiansolidarity.net or on our YouTube or Facebook pages. So you can always go back and find it. No need to worry. Also, if you enjoy Solidarity on Tap, please consider giving a gift to sustain the work of the Ignatian Solidarity Network. You can do that by going to ignatiansolidarity.net/donate. And we want to make sure we know you're out there. We know you're watching. Maybe you've got some friends over socially distanced at your house or in the backyard. You can share a picture of yourself watching or having a virtual watch party to your Instagram account or your Twitter account. Tag us at Ignatian Solidarity and make sure to use the hashtag ISN Live, of course, as well. And let's come back to Krisanne, and we could talk a little bit more about the work of the Catholic Mobilizing Network. Obviously, with these executions that we just talked about, there's a lot going on for CMN. But your work, it's really bigger than just talking about capital punishment. CMN has been engaged in supporting the work of folks who are ministering in the prison system and supporting work around restorative justice. You want to tell us a little bit more about kind of the breadth of the work that CMN is doing?
Sure. Yeah. And I think I appreciate you bringing that up because, what we are against is an important part of the work in Catholic Mobilizing, ending the death penalty, and that won't change. We will see that through. But from the very beginning, we have been about promoting restorative justice, which is a different way to understand harm and violence and crime than the traditional criminal justice or criminal legal system. The criminal legal system is more retributive, asking what law was broken and who did it, and who needs to be punished. In a restorative justice framework, you're asking questions like, what was the harm, who was impacted, and what needs to be done to make it right, or what repair needs to be done. And so it's just an entirely different way of thinking about harm. And for us, that is what we're trying to kind of, I would say, tease out of the Catholic community because it's there. Restorative justice, its practices, its principles align very closely to Catholic social teaching. When you think about, when you're asking about what harm was done and who was impacted, that gives some space to recognize the dignity of everyone involved. The dignity of the person who's harmed, the person who did the harming, and the community, that is impacted along the way. And so you're really honoring human dignity. And what's that so basic to Catholic social teaching and to our faith? And then when you think about how we could be in solidarity with one another, how we can build a culture of encounter, how we can believe in participation and rights and responsibilities, all those Catholic social teaching principles that we know and love really resonate so well with restorative justice. And so for Catholic Mobilizing, that's the bigger work, that undergirds our work of ending the death penalty. And it also helps us to raise our sights and imagine a different way to deal with harm and violence. And so, there are practices that restorative justice practitioners use. The circle and circle process, peacekeeping circles are a huge part of kind of creating safe spaces, not necessarily comfortable spaces, because safe spaces mean that you can share things even that are difficult. And the circle, the space will be held, and healing can happen. So there's things like, a talking piece, and there's kind of some ritual to restorative justice and its practices. But really, that's what we're trying to illuminate and amplify for the Catholic community. And I think, Chris, it has so much to do with the racial divisions that are happening in our country that have happened for a really long time, but the healing that can happen and the reckoning that can happen, that needs to happen, I think restorative justice and its approaches can help us in those conversations. And even the political divisiveness in this country right now. I mean, we need places where we can have real conversations and where there can be some trust built and some ability to speak about your experience, right? And not be judged, but to offer your experience and for people to tell the truth and for people to hear the truth, you know, truth telling and truth hearing environments. And I think restorative justice can bring that about. So that's what we're trying to do through circle trainings and circle intensives. And we have a book called, this is our newest book, Harm, Healing, and Human Dignity. It's a small book, you know, it's kind of more of a popular education tool and understanding what restorative justice is in the context of our Catholic faith. And then we have a blog, you know, that people share their stories of how they're using restorative justice practices in their ministries. So that's the life-giving side of the work. I mean, I've been an advocate for many years on several different causes, and you know, I'm an advocate true and true. But I have to say that the restorative justice is calling out the best in us, and that's what I want to be about. That's what the organization really is about. And so, in order to be the best of who we can be, we need to end the death penalty in this country. It is only inculcating a culture of death. We want to be building a culture of life, and restorative justice can help us get there as Catholics.
Absolutely. And to kind of touch on the racial justice piece in connection with the work of CMN around the death penalty, I mean, we look at the idea of systematic racism. I mean, the death penalty, you know, the interplay between those two over the course of the history of our country. Obviously, there's a lot there. Is there anything you want to tell us about kind of those intersections?
Well, you know, CMN's always known. I mean, people who work on the death penalty know that, you know, they say if you don't have the capital, you get the punishment. You know, people know that if you're poor, and especially if you're a person of color and there's a white victim, you're much more likely to be incarcerated. And if it's a crime, I guess, you know, bad enough, you potentially could get the death penalty. And so you see the numbers, you know, it's proportionately affecting people of color. And capital punishment is no different. So we have always known that's a part of this work. And I think that, you know, for example, the movie Just Mercy, it's come out, has it been a year yet? Not even. I think you all have done some work on it. We're promoting that movie. It's a case of innocence of Walter McMillan, you know, being sentenced to death in the state of Alabama. He was later exonerated, but it's kind of his story. And Brian Stevenson, who is the head of the Equal Justice Initiative and author of Just Mercy, the book, the New York Times bestseller, you know, it's just an incredible story of looking at a Black man in Alabama on death row and the odds against him. And I think that just tells a story that we know to be true. And certainly the legacy of slavery and lynching leads into mass incarceration, over-incarceration, and, you know, state-sanctioned killing, which we see in the death penalty. So it is not lost on us that this race conversation includes every piece of our work. I just want to say that, like many organizations or many people, since the terrible killing of George Floyd, I mean, we have taken yet another look at our organization and the reckoning that we need to do as a mostly white organization, and we're committed to that work. You know, it's we need to go deep into looking at how their systems, our culture, our systems, our institutions. You know, this is systemic racism. It's going to take every part of all of us to end racism in this country, to acknowledge the white supremacy that we kind of swim in, and to really create a world that honors the dignity of every person, regardless of the color of their skin. I mean, and so that's the work that's before us for sure.
Yeah, it's we have to think about the long game in this work, because realities are complex. There are important steps we need to take immediately, but also how do we sustain our commitment, I think is really, really important as well. Krisanne, as we finish up, particularly right now in the midst of this kind of onslaught of federal executions and all that's happening in our world, I think it could be challenging to find hope, but I'd be curious to know what gives you hope in the work that you're doing at CMN.
Well, thanks for asking that, Chris. I'll tell you something. This past week has been tough with these 3 executions, and I guess I'll just let you in on a little secret. As education, advocacy, and prayer organization, we do a lot of the educating, a lot of the advocating, and we pray. We're a Catholic organization, and kind of we have a posture of prayer for sure. But honestly, last week when the executions were imminent and the push was so relentless by the federal government, we looked at each other, the staff, particularly of Catholic Mobilizing, and we thought, we have nothing left. We have nothing left but to pray. And so we held 3 prayer vigils, and we often will do this for executions, kind of, or our supporters will do it in the places where there's an execution, say in Texas or Georgia or other places. But with COVID, we couldn't do that. And so we had a virtual prayer, and we were just so heartened by all the folks that came forward to pray with us. And it was powerful. We're not alone in this work, and this work can get tough. And the road is sometimes not clear, and certainly disappointing. But it's not ended. We are redoubling our commitment, and the prayer got us through last week. It buoyed us last week.
Amen to that. Well, Krisanne, it's been wonderful to be with you tonight to learn more about your story and your work at CMN, and especially at this very unique time for our country. I think we have a lot of work to do around the death penalty and around a culture of life and human dignity. And so thank you so much for sharing the work of Catholic Mobilizing Network and for your ongoing work, especially in these past couple of weeks. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight for Solidarity on Tap. I know we didn't get a chance to give a shout out to everyone, but I just we'll do real quick. I saw a few more. Thank you to Angel for joining us from the Diocese of Brownsville, to Stephen for joining us from Cincinnati and Bellarmine Chapel down there, and to Lupe from Maryknoll Lay Missioners as well, and Emo from Carlsbad, California, and the Ignatian Volunteer Corps community in San Diego. Thanks to all those folks for being with us, and we hope you'll join us. We'll gather again in 2 weeks for virtual Solidarity on Tap. So make sure to join us 2 weeks from now on Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Good to be with you.